Let's start off with the four immeasurables to correct our motivation. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay. So this is our last session for the 4 types of patience. So I realized as I was thinking about how I would present the material today, I realized that actually there's actually still an awful lot to talk about, but we only have 1.5 hours to talk about it in. So we'll see how we go. I don't want to overload you with lots of information. So even if we don't get to cover all of the points or all of the points in great detail, I think what is most important is that you go away with some tools and some skills that you can apply in your everyday life, really. And also, if you have questions that have come up, either today that come up or that have come up over the past few weeks, please do ask them, because it's really important to dispel our doubts that we have about this practice, because patience is like so important. We need to have a good understanding of exactly what it means to be patient, and also how really fundamentally negative anger is, so that we develop a very strong wish to eliminate it from our minds, even the slightest, subtlest little bit of anger. So we all like the idea of being ourselves, don't we? We like to have the independence, the freedom to be ourselves. We don't like anybody trying to make us be somebody different. We consider that to be a type of freedom if we don't have to conform to what other people want or other people think. But the problem is with being ourselves is what that really falls back on is our old habits. So it's following our old habits and our old patterns of anger, of attachment, of self-cherishing. And then as long as we follow along those old patterns of anger and attachment and self-cherishing and all the other afflictions that come with them, then wherever we go, they come with us. And what that means is that you can be having a lovely holiday with your body, your body's sitting on a beach somewhere nice, but your mind doesn't get a holiday, because your mind is constantly together with these afflictions that are creating disturbance for your mind. In fact, we can say that the definition of an affliction, sometimes afflictions, we translate them as disturbing emotions, but more commonly translated as afflictions. So the definition of an affliction is that which, when it arises, disturbs the mind. So as long as we are together with these things that we've had since beginningless time, then our mind won't really be at peace. There'll be some fluctuation where perhaps, our mind is not as disturbed as other times, but there will be this continual disturbance that occurs in the mind due to those afflictions. So they'll end up bringing us agitation of the mind, unhappiness of the mind, all sorts of troubles. And we'll never really develop that sense of satisfaction and contentment and peace of mind. So what Lama Yeshe says, so Lama Yeshe, of course, is the founder of FPMT, is he says, actually, don't be yourself. He says, don't be specifically your old self. So don't be the self that you're habituated to with all the afflictions that go with it, because that old self, the old self has a closed heart and a closed mind. not an open heart and an open mind. And so that closed mind, that closed heart, and that old self works only for oneself and doesn't work for the sake of others. And the irony of that is that through working only for yourself and your own happiness, then actually you end up just with more suffering for yourself, the continual suffering. Sometimes some happiness, but it changes into suffering again, and sometimes some happiness and it changes into suffering again. You just continue on in that constant stream of up and down, up and down, up and down, where you never really achieve that satisfactory happiness that you're looking for, the one that's the lasting type of happiness, real peace of mind. So through thinking only of ourselves, then what happens is that we don't achieve our own goals, and we certainly don't achieve the goals of others. And also, Lama Yeshe says, is that old self, the one that's together with the afflictions, together with self-cherishing. It even thinks that we're not responsible for the happiness of others. It doesn't even realize that our own happiness is dependent upon others. So we can think about that in quite like a coarse way, in the sense of like our physical comfort that we get, just even today in this life that we're experiencing now. That physical comfort depends upon so many other beings. Like if you think about, for instance, one of the meals that you ate today, maybe lunch, and you think about all of the beings that just that lunch depended upon. So for starters, we have all the beings that nurtured the soil, maybe you ate some vegetables, hopefully there was a vegetable in there. It's good to eat vegetables, right? So maybe some vegetables, but there is also probably some kind of carbohydrate. So whether it was wheat or rice or whatever it was. So there are all these things that are grown from the ground. And that's all these beings in the ground that made the soil fertile. So it was able to support these crops that are the basis for all our food. And then there are all the beings, the people who harvested those crops, looked after the crops as they were growing, harvested the crops. And then perhaps there was some processing that had to happen to transform the wheat or the rice into something that was edible for us. And all the vegetables had to be properly packed, cleaned, prepared. And then there was all the shipment that happened. So probably our vegetables that we eat these days, they don't come from somewhere local. They come from quite far away. Sometimes, I'll go to the shops and when we've got a shortage of bananas in Australia, sometimes you'll find bananas have come all the way from South America. I mean, that's ages away. Imagine all of the work that's involved in transporting bananas from basically one side of the world to the other side of the world, all the people that it depends on. And then it gets to, your shop, and there's all the people that have to stock the shelves, that look after the finances of the shop and keep it running and do the maintenance on the building. I mean, you can really extrapolate out to a great extent. And, not only that, we can also think about what about all the beings involved, the people and other beings involved in the creation of all the necessary bits and pieces to create the buildings that we buy the food from. I mean, it's incredible the amount of beings that we depend on just for one meal in a day. So really our own happiness, just in terms of physical comfort, depends very much on so many other beings. And then also our mental happiness depends in part on our physical comfort, but also it's like we can derive great benefit from others on a mental level in terms of our attitude towards them. So if we have a vast attitude towards all beings that is extremely loving and kind and affectionate and compassionate, then our own mind has this vast benefit that comes with that. You can extrapolate out just from one being who you get along quite well with, you have a good relationship with, and you wish them to be happy, you wish them to be free from suffering. And there's a happiness of mind that comes together with having that wish for them to be happy, having that affection towards them. So if you had that attitude, and this is the thing with mind, is that you can train the mind to do this. If you had that attitude towards like more beings, make it 100 beings, make it 1,000 beings, limitless beings, then what is the benefit that is derived from that? I mean, it's quite incredible to think about, isn't it? What your mind would be like if you had this affectionate, caring, kind attitude towards each and every sentient being. The happiness that you would derive from that, the mental satisfaction that you would derive from that would be limitless. So this all depends on other beings. So both our physical comfort, just even in the short term, and our mental happiness, these all depend on others. So this is the kind of attitude we want to change our minds into. So not going with the old self, as Lama Yeti says, that's closed-minded, that's closed-hearted, but instead expanding out our attitude. So trying to move beyond just being the self that we have been so far and really trying to be a new self that's good-hearted, it's warm-hearted. Okay, so if we don't do that, then basically wherever we go, we're going to be accomplished. Not going to be accomplished. We're going to be accompanied by anger, by attachment, by pride, by jealousy, by ignorance. They'll come with us. They'll keep creating problems for us. So probably you might have a question about the attachment. Are you all familiar with what attachment means in Buddhism? Yes? Okay. Shella, what does it mean?
Means to want to put something above the happiness of others, or maybe become so obsessed with something that um, I couldn't think of anything else. Or I think that might be close.
It definitely involves that kind of latching on to a particular thing. So whether it's a person or it's an object, there is this sort of, it's like, they talk about the analogy for attachment is like when oil seeps into a cloth, it's really hard to get rid of it, it sort of gets stuck in there. And attachment's kind of like that. So when we talk about like attachment in a Western psychology way, I don't really know a lot about Western psychology. I've got the basics, I suppose, but I don't know a great deal. But as far as I understand it, attachment from a Western psychology perspective is seen as something that's positive. It's to do with the emotional bond with another person that leaves you with that sense of security that then I suppose, puts you in good stead for the rest of your life in terms of having that sense of security. So in Buddhism, we don't really talk about it like that. So in terms of the Buddhist presentation of attachment, of course, we've got to use a word that already exists in the English language. So this is the word that's been chosen, is attachment. So attachment is actually something that leads to discontent because the way that it operates is it does not accord with reality. So attachment, in fact, is as a consciousness that exaggerates. So it exaggerates positive attributes of an object, whether it be a person or another object. And it gives you the sense that it is that object that's going to give you happiness. That object has the ability to give you 100% happiness. That's really what attachment does. And because we all want happiness, we all think that the happinesses that we experience, that we have the ability to experience in our lives are like, fantastic because our attachment tells us they are, then we strive to get more and more of those happinesses. But the thing is that all the pleasures that we experience in life, because of the way that their causes and their conditions, the way that we experience them is such that they don't ever remain long term. There's always this change. So our attachment tells us, go for the next happiness, go for the next happiness. It'll be the perfect happiness. It'll last for you. It'll stay with you for a long time. So we strive for the next happiness. And then gradually over time, the pleasure we derive from that dissipates and sort of like neutral or even suffering reemerges. And so then we strive for the next happiness and the next happiness. So our attachment is really problematic in that it makes us continually strive for these happinesses that can never actually match up to what attachment tells us they can do. So it's especially problematic when it's, you have attachment for a person. And this is, maybe we've already talked about this. I can't remember if we talked about this in one of the other classes, but anyway, it's okay. We can chat about it again. So it's like especially when you develop intimate relationships with a person. So you've all had this experience where when you first meet a person that you're quite attracted to, it's like they appear like this amazing person, really wonderful person, and you're going to get so much happiness from that person. So you spend some time with them, and all you see at the start are the positive qualities, really. Even if you can see some little faults, you kind of discount them. You don't pay attention to them. You just focus on the positive things, and you think that's really what that person is about. But then gradually over time, attachment subsides a bit, and you start to see more of those faults and more of them come up. And what happens then is that, especially if a lot come up, you get angry at the person. Do you? I mean, this is something that happens. You start to see faults in the person and you get angry at the person. Actually, what's happened is that person, very unlikely that they've changed. They were always like that. We all have a combination of faults and qualities, all of us. Probably think of even the worst person in the world still have some basis of qualities in their mind. Even if you can't identify like a particular quality like love for their pet or love for their parent or something like that, just the fact that they have mind that has the ability to change and develop positive qualities, that is a positive quality. So we all have positive qualities and we have negative qualities. But our attachment, when we first meet this kind of person who, we're attracted to, then our attachment blinds us to all the faults. We only see the qualities. And then when we start to see the faults, then we think, oh, that person's changed. How could they change? It's just our attachment has subsided. And once we see reality, and reality does not accord with the rosy colored vision that attachment had of that person, then instead of just going down to reality and we go, oh, yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, of course, this person's going to have some faults as well as some qualities. No, we don't do that. We like go way beyond that, don't we? And we go, oh, that's terrible. They've changed. How could they? How could they do that to me? They were supposed to give me happiness. I mean, of course, I'm kind of exaggerating, but this is the underlying thought process that goes on. So, in fact, really behind attachment is anger waiting to rear its head. So, anger kind of gets annoyed that the person is not living up to that expectation that attachment created, even though it was attachment that created the expectation, not the other person. But we don't get angry at the attachment, we get angry at the person. Yeah. So this is how attachment creates problems for our mind. We're not talking about having this secure emotional bond that enables us to then understand or have that sense of security that we can rely on in the future. We're not really talking about that from a Western psychology perspective. We're talking about it very specifically in this Buddhist perspective. Yeah, where there's this exaggeration that happens. Attachment does not accord with reality. Attachment will therefore be backed up by anger. Yeah. So as long as we have anger, of course, we understand how anger disturbs our mind, because when anger arises, there's this natural agitation we can identify. But also attachment likewise disturbs our mind as long as we have that in there, and all the other afflictions as well. So we don't want to just like act naturally in the sense of act in accordance with our old habits. We want to create these new habits that make us a new person, a good-hearted, positive type of person. That's what our real goal is. Yeah. So this is what Lama Yeshe says. Okay, so last week we talked about mostly, I think, well, maybe exclusively about one of the types of patients of the 4 types of patients. So it was the patients of developing loving kindness and compassion. Okay, so do you have any questions? Having thought about it over the week that's just passed, have any questions come up in your mind about this? No. Okay. The danger I might ask you guys some questions if you don't have any to fire at me. Yeah, Jerry.
I have, well, maybe an observation of my own mind. Like for me, it can be something really small. And looking back on the notes from the last time, I'm expressing anger really quickly, like super quick, and it's probably really silly. It's not really that important. But the idea of trying to catch my mind before I get there, it's like I can just react like that. It's like super quick. I'm not angry all the time, but I can get really frustrated, and even if it's just sitting in my computer and something's not working, what's wrong with this bloody whatever. And I mean, that frustration is a early form of anger, isn't it? It's definitely, I know I'm very impatient, but I noticed myself last week a couple of times. Oh God, I sounded really cranky, and it just came out like that. I hadn't even thought of it, and the words were out my mouth.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. So that's the start point, really, is at first to identify it. So that's a good sign that you're identifying it. Like over the last week, you really noticed this has happened. It's like you've gone from just meeting the thing or coming across the person or the computer or the object, whatever it is, and attachment is like, anger is like straight away on top of it. It's just coming out of your mouth, or it's manifesting in your physical expression, whatever it might be. Even it could be with anger, we might not even say something. We've got anger in our mind, and we might even just change our facial expression slightly with the intention to cause displeasure to another person, for instance, right? We do that. We think, oh, I haven't really acted out upon my anger, but actually we already have. So this is the thing, is we're so habituated to the anger that we just meet the object of anger and straight away the anger comes. So it's not the case that we can expect that all of a sudden, after having thought about anger and patience for, a few weeks, that all of a sudden that's going to stop.
More than a few weeks. Probably
even like, a few months, a few years even, right? And it leads back to a point, Sheila, that you brought up last week, is I remember when you said, I allow myself to get angry. So this is a very good point, Jerry, that you've mentioned now, because exactly what you've demonstrated here is that you've not allowed yourself to get angry in the sense that you've had the intention to get angry. You've thought about it and you've made the decision. Should I get angry or should I not get angry? What's the best response here? Oh, I think I'll allow myself to get angry. So that's not what happens, is it? You just get angry straight away. So the first step for us, it's unrealistic to think that we're going to be able to put a bit of space in between meeting the object of anger and getting angry right at the start. But the first thing is to identify how it arises in our mind like that straight away. Notice as many instances of anger as we can, not just the big ones, like we talked about, the ones where it really causes you to act out physically or verbally, the really fiery ones, where you might start to feel that burning sensation in your face, that real kind of, I hesitate to say power of mind. It's more like aggression in the mind. That's like top level anger. But notice also all these subtler variants of anger where you have, even just a slight ill will towards another person or towards an object. Notice all of the range. So this is like our first step, is to notice what's happening in the mind. And then what we want to do is, this is the training we have to do before we get angry, right? So once you're already angry, very difficult to do anything about it. The training we have to do just to reduce the anger and to improve our patience happens before that. So we have to think about these things over and over and over in our mind, which is how faulty anger is, all the problems that come from anger. To think about how the assumptions that underlie our anger are actually incorrect. Remember, we talked about all those assumptions. We came up with a long list, 14 or 15 assumptions underlying our anger. Every single one of those will be incorrect, 100% guaranteed. I was hoping we'd have time to go back and look through each one of them after we'd talked a bit more about patience so that we can see clearly how they're incorrect. Maybe we'll have time to go over a few of them, but every single one, 100% incorrect. So what we need to do is then analyze how all those assumptions incorrect, each one of them. And then we have to think, well, what is appropriate? If anger is actually not helping me, and in fact, anger is actually harming me, then what's an appropriate response to have instead? So the appropriate response is, the beneficial, I should say, response is to have loving kindness and compassion. So if we don't have a really good practice of loving kindness and compassion, it will be very difficult to maintain our patience to other people. Very difficult. So that loving kindness and compassion, that practice has to happen consistently over a long period of time. And through that, then we will start to notice that there's, it's like, well, through these three things, I would say. So we've got recognizing the anger in our mind, 3 or 4 things. So recognizing the anger that's in our mind, understanding how it is 100% negative. It is always negative. It is never beneficial. And leading into that, also, we have to understand how all those assumptions that support the development of our anger, that they are all 100% wrong, understanding that. And then coming to understand how compassion and loving kindness are essential. So through these steps, then we will start, through our familiarity, we'll start to develop a bit of a gap between meeting the object and getting angry. So the first thing will be that we'll notice how much we're getting angry. And it can be a little bit like, actually, I think sometimes, like when you start to study and practice Buddhism, and sometimes you feel like you're going backwards. Have any of you had this experience? It's like you feel like you're getting worse somehow. Yep. It's not that you're getting worse. It's the fact that you're noticing, exactly. You're starting to identify all the things that are causing problems in your own mind. Because before that, just going on oblivious. Oh, yeah, it's fine if I get angry. Oh, it's fine, it's attachment. Oh, it's fine to have some afflicted pride, You didn't even consider that these were unhelpful things going on in your own mind. So once you start to notice all the varieties of anger that occur in your mind, it can feel a little bit disheartening, because you feel like, oh no, I'm such an angry person. I feel like I'm more angry than I was before. It's just that you're noticing all of it. And that is a good thing. It's a good thing, because we need to notice and identify all of it in order to remove all of it. Just like when you're removing a surgeon removing a tumor in the brain needs to make sure they take out all of the tumor, not leave any of it behind. So that's the first step. You notice it. Then, through understanding how negative anger is and how the assumptions behind it are 100% wrong, what you start to do is you start to put some separation between the object and actually getting angry, because you've started to not want to get angry. You've really started developing that more intense desire to stop anger. Yeah, so you start to see how it's faulty, and you look back at the anger and you go, this is not helpful for me. So you'll get a bit of a gap. You'll focus back on the anger more than you focus on the object. And then through a continual practice of loving kindness and compassion, what you'll be doing is you'll be putting in the main seat in your mind goodwill, the intention to benefit others. So whether you've met them before, whether you haven't met them before, you'll develop a stronger and stronger intention to benefit others, whoever you come across. And through that, having that real habituation and familiarity with that in your mind, that will become the natural response for you. And once that becomes, so at first it requires a lot of effort and a lot of consistent practice, but over time, this is the nature of mind, is that through familiarizing with correct ways of thinking, they will become the dominant ones in your mind over time. So as long as you manage to maintain, or however much you can maintain, the goodwill, intention to benefit in your mind, anger, which is ill will, the intention to harm, won't get a look in. It won't have a seat to sit on in your mind. So one of the ways that we can go about developing this loving kindness and compassion is exactly by reflecting on what happens for ourselves currently now. So exactly this, perfect what you explained, Jerry, and the way that we get angry currently. So in order to develop real compassion that understands what impels other people to do harm to us, we need to understand how we ourselves in our own mind just like automatically get angry at the drop of a hat. So what I think it's either Chandrakirti or it's Lama Tsongkhapa says, in terms of developing compassion, says, if the hairs of your body do not stand on end at the prospect of your own suffering in cyclic existence, there is no way for you to develop the compassion that finds the suffering of others unbearable.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Jade. Oh dear. Indeed. Oh dear. Yeah. So what that means is like not just in terms of manifest type sufferings, we can all see those types of suffering quite easily when we ourselves are going through mental unhappiness, physical unhappiness, when we see others going through mental or physical unhappiness. That's quite easy to see. What's more difficult to see is, for instance, how we lack control. We lack control over our experiences, whether we'll experience happiness, whether we'll experience suffering in a particular moment. We also lack control over the afflictions, which are the things that create our experiences of happiness or suffering. Not only do we lack control over them, we just give in to them, right? It's not only that we give in to them, we oftentimes think that they're actually helping us. So unless we really understand our own way of approaching the afflictions, how we are under the control of afflictions in our current situation, just as you've described it, Jerry, that's exactly what happens. It's through our great familiarity, through beginningless lifetime. So we're not even talking just about this lifetime. We're so habituated to afflictions like attachment and anger that you just meet the object straight away. You don't think about it. You get angry. That's what happens. And through understanding that's what happens for us and developing a compassion for ourselves that wants us to get beyond that state of lacking control over our experiences, lacking control over our mind, then we can really understand that this is what happens for everybody else, right? Setting aside bodhisattvas and Buddhas and all of those realized beings, right? But for all other ordinary beings, this is exactly the same. Everybody else encounters an object that they find difficult straight away. They get angry. Might be subtle, might be big. Yep, that's what happens. So I think that it's actually really good to analyze. So Sheila, what you were saying last week about I allow myself to get angry, really analyze it in relation to yourself. Each and every one of us needs to do this. Is it that I make a choice? Or is it actually that it's my afflictions that are in control here? And that's not to say that therefore I shouldn't do anything about it. Or, it's not my fault. Like, oh, therefore I'll just leave it be. What that should spur us on to really think is that I don't have control over this situation. I don't have control over my mind and what arises in my mind. I don't have control over my experiences of happiness or suffering. So what I need to do is I need to look after myself and make sure I do what I can to attain control. So it should spur us on to a course of action. That's really what self-compassion is about, is spurring ourselves onto a course of action, which makes it so we develop some kind of benefit in our own mind, some kind of peace of mind, some kind of control over our mind. And then we extend that to others, seeing that everybody else is in the same position. And so also, I want that for everybody else. I want everybody else to be able to control their own minds, control their afflictions, have control over their experiences of happiness or suffering. I want that for everybody. And that spurs us on to act for the benefit of others. So compassion, having compassion and loving kindness for yourself, or having compassion or loving kindness towards others, is not just like a sort of passive state where you go, poor me, or I'd like to have happiness, or poor others, I'd like them to have happiness. It's actually something which drives us to take a course of action to accomplish that. Freedom from suffering and being endowed with happiness. Jade, you had a question before. Sorry, I was on a roll.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. This is an unresolved issue in terms of how I would define anger, because I have a problem. I find that I can use anger to energize myself, right? And to do good things, whereas I might be sort of passive, more or less righteous anger. So I'm not quite clear where that fits in, because it does feel like it's a good thing, as a matter of fact. Okay, so I'll say that. The other thing I'll volunteer is that one of the things that helps me is when I get angry to then try to change that into compassion, yeah, toward whoever I'm angry at particularly. I do my best. That can be challenging. So those are my comments and question and comment.
Yeah, I mean, if you can change your anger into compassion straight away, that's excellent, but it is quite hard to do. So it usually requires quite a lot of training to make sure that we don't leave behind some ill will, and really develop that heartfelt compassion. But it's excellent if you're able to do that. So in terms of the righteous anger, can you give me an example of that?
Yes, okay. Let's say when I was working, services were not supplying vulnerable people, and I would advocate for those vulnerable people. And clearly, some of what was going on with me was anger underneath that. Like, how can this be so dysfunctional? How inhumane? That kind of argument was going on in my head. So, in a sense, it gave me more energy to then advocate for the client.
So in that context then, so given that anger is necessarily ill will or an intention to harm, so did you have an intention to harm, or who did you have the intention to harm?
No, I only had the intention to sort the situation out. But I wasn't going to take no for an answer. So I was clear that I was going to persist. But it didn't feel like it was actually harming them. Although clearly I think my persistence could be irritating to people. It's true. But, in some sense, that's their problem. It wasn't my intention to irritate them. In fact, often I would endeavor, and hey, guys, we're in Australia. Tact is really important over here. You'll get much further, right? And so I would kind of take a breath and then try to do that in a positive way to encourage whoever to supply what was needed.
So I guess my question then would be, you have to check to see, was it really anger or not? I mean, from what you're describing, it sounds like it wasn't actually anger. There was frustration there. Maybe even you're upset with the situation that you'd encountered, and so you're wanting to do something about it. But if you didn't have the actual intention to harm another person or harm an object or something, then you have to question as to whether that really was anger or not. It's possible that anger arose, or the intention to harm arose, in certain situations where you might have been discussing the issue with the people who weren't providing the funding, weren't providing the necessary things that you needed. And it may be that an intention to harm arose during those conversations. It's possible, you have to investigate your own mind. But whether there was like an overall intention to harm, it sounds more like you had an intention to benefit certain people, and you felt you had to pursue perhaps a very assertive form of, what do you say, like a method in order to accomplish that goal.
What would you call my emotional? I mean, because it's like, in some sense, I took umbrage that they were doing what they were neglecting to do whatever, right? And that the situation was so complex, bureaucracy was unbelievable. So, it's like there was an emotional response. There's no question about it. It's like kind of like, how dare they, not do their job? That kind of response, which feels like anger to me, very similar to anger.
It's possible. Like, I'm not saying that there was not anger there. It's something you have to really investigate your own mind for. It sounds like frustration and being upset, so having your mind disturbed, and that even if it's not fully fledged anger, it's definitely a precursor to anger. Yeah. So having the precursor to anger there, that's basically the fuel for anger. Is what it means is, if you, in the process of trying to attain the services that were required for the people who need them, if you came across somebody who was quite obstructive or even perhaps rude to you, that probably anger would arise straight away and you'd want to be rude back. This is the problem with the fuel for anger, that being upset, being unable to bear, being unable to tolerate a particular situation mentally, right? What it leads to is that makes it so that anger is just like on the verge of arising so quickly. So what I would say in that situation is that although you've used what you had at your disposal, I suppose, in that situation to proceed to try and get the result that you wanted for the people you were trying to help, but actually another way to approach it is by having compassion for both the people who you're trying to help. So clearly you had compassion for the people that you're trying to help. But also what we need to include here now is having compassion for the people who are trying to hinder. So if you have compassion for both the people you're trying to help and the people who are trying to hinder your helping those people, it doesn't mean that therefore you don't have power. In fact, you will have even greater power in your mind. So this is the thing with compassion, is compassion, like I was saying before in that quote, it says, if the hairs of your body do not stand on end at the prospect of your own suffering in cyclic existence, so not just suffering of suffering, but your own lack of control in cyclic existence, you will not have no way to find the suffering or the lack of control, the situation of others, unbearable, and thereby develop compassion. So compassion itself actually is a mind or a mental factor that finds something unbearable. It finds the suffering, it finds the lack of control, that completely unbearable, so that you have to do something about it. You have to do something about it for yourself, and you have to do something about it for others. So how that manifests physically and verbally depends on the situation. But what we're talking about in terms of having to do something is what it means is we have to find the methods and then put into practice the methods for reducing afflictions in our own mind and eliminating them entirely. And we have to also want that for others and do what we can to help others to also be able to reduce and eliminate the afflictions from their own mind. So on that basis of really developing a strong wish to benefit in that respect, so wanting both the people that you're trying to help to be free of suffering, but also make it so that you have that compassion also directed towards the people who are hindering. Because if they have negative minds when they're hindering what you're trying to do, it may be that they're just doing their job and their hands are tied and they don't have enough funding to give out, and they're doing the best that they can, right? So that might be one situation. It might be that actually they quite enjoy having power and they, like not handing out the money that they're supposed to because they enjoy having power over it. Sometimes you get people like that in positions of power. If it's the case that it's the latter, and they enjoy having power and they enjoy having power over whether other people benefit from what they can give or not, essentially, they're going to have a negative mind towards others. What that does is that creates the causes for suffering for them themselves. It harms the other people and it also harms themselves. It means they don't have control over their own mind. That's why people harm others, is because they don't have control over their mind. So having both compassion for the people you're trying to help and also compassion for those people who are hindering, whether it's because they don't have the power to help or whether they're intentionally seeking to hinder, that in both cases, they're worthy of compassion. And on that basis, finding it unbearable, then you go about whatever methods you need to put into practice to try and achieve benefit for the people you're trying to help. And also whether you can benefit the people who are hindering or not, who knows, you may be able to, but at the very least, having a mind that wishes them to be free of that suffering, free of the causes for suffering, the afflictions in their mind. So it's a bit of a different approach as to rather than going us and them, I'll have compassion for the people who I have affection for, and I won't have compassion for the people that I see as being problematic. We want to have compassion for both, and that really would give us even more power than just having the frustration of not being able to, fully help the people that we're trying to help. Does it make sense?
Yes. Yeah. It'll be a challenge for me, however.
It's always a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. But, things don't become less challenging by not trying.
Yeah. Okay.
They only become less challenging when we keep working at it and keep working at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cynthia?
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for your teachings. I really appreciate it. I just have a clarification. I was just listening to what you were explaining. So when I started the Buddhism classes way back, I guess my understanding was that anger included, and I understand why they explain it like that to simplify things. So my understanding is that anger includes irritations, annoyance, irritability, but now I'm hearing you explain that that's not necessarily anger, but it's a precursor, is the word you used. It can easily turn into anger if we don't control, or we're not able to subdue it. Is that correct understanding? And because then I have a question, if that is true, is the antidote to those the same as the antidote to anger?
Yeah. So, again, we have to check our own minds. So I would say definitely just getting upset about something, that in and of itself is not anger. You move over into anger when you have the intention to harm. And this is why it's so important, like I was saying before in response to Jerry's question. So it's so important to identify all the various subtleties of anger within our mind, because currently we probably only identify the big ticket intention to harm as anger when we're really fiery. But when you look in your mind, you can see sometimes you have quite a subtle intention to harm, just a very small one, a very subtle one. And that can appear before we've even identified that anger has occurred in our mind. So just being upset, that's not anger. Whether frustration or irritation has turned into anger, that's something you really have to check for yourself and see, you know, because it's like at that point, as soon as it's the intention to harm, then it will be anger at that point. So in terms of like the upsetness or a frustration that is not yet anger, then yes, definitely loving kindness and compassion are really going to be the antidotes to stop. They will stop that fuel for anger to arise. It'll stop that negative mental talk for anger to arise. So one thing is definitely loving kindness and compassion, because you're keeping in your mind the intention to benefit. While you keep in your mind the intention to benefit goodwill, then anger, no chance. So that's one thing. The other thing to think about here also is actually in one of these the 4 types of patience that we have yet to discuss, is we talk about the patience of in regards to putting up a target. So often we get upset about something because we've experienced some suffering, right? So somebody has done something, and as a result of that, or in dependence upon that, then we've experienced some suffering. So this is also a useful thing to think about, because when we have anger, we're very much focused on the object. So when anger arises, you know, before it arises in our mind, when we're just upset about the experience that we're having right now, or, you know, when we're starting to think about what that person did to us, you know, all the mental ruminations building up, and we're about to flip over into that, I want to get them back, you know, I want to harm them in some way in return, I want to retaliate. So as that's all happening, what we're doing is we're focusing on the object of the anger. And as long as we continue to focus on the object of the anger when all that rumination is going on in our mind, or what we call the improper mental attention, then all it's going to do is just, you know, add more and more and more and more fuel, and the anger is going to explode, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if we've managed to maintain loving kindness and compassion, we put a dampener on that, and hopefully we even manage to completely transform our mind so anger doesn't arise. But the other useful tool is to think about, what is the main cause for my experience of suffering now?
Self-cherishing.
Oh, self-cherishing, very good. Yeah, self-cherishing, the root of all problems. Yep, exactly, totally. So that's a good one to remember in your mind. I like it, thank you. So yes, we can think self-cherishing in general, very useful, but also when we think about specifically the suffering that has now arisen for me, who created the main cause of that? Yeah, self-cherishing did. Self-cherishing together with ignorance. Specifically, we have to say, I created the main cause for that. We're thinking in a karmic cause and effect kind of system, then we have to say that we ourselves, at some point in the past, maybe this life, probably previous lives, created the substantial cause that has now arisen as suffering. And yeah, the person who I came across right now has played a bit of a part, but it's kind of like my own karma essentially has made it so that I would experience suffering now. Because somebody else might come along, have the same experience, and actually not experience suffering. It's quite possible. Just as, like, you know, say if you have a cake, and one person will have a piece of cake and eat it and go, oh, so delicious. Another person comes along, eats the cake and goes, oh, that was disgusting. Right? So maybe it's carrot cake. Some people really love carrot cake. Some people can't stand carrot cake. I don't know if this is a thing in the States, but yeah, you know, some people I know just can't stand it. They're like, no, it's got vegetables in it. Can't stand it. Who puts vegetables in a cake? Right? But other people really love it. So the cake, therefore, is not the main cause of the happiness or the suffering that the person eating it experiences. It's just a condition. The main cause actually is within your own continuum, based on the actions that you have performed in the past. So this is another really useful tool in terms of thinking about that difficult experience we're going through, that suffering we're currently experiencing, is to take the focus off the object that we're starting to get angry at and put it back on who created the main cause for this experience. So this is something that's really important to get right when we apply this tool, because there is a danger that you can look at other people going through suffering and your mind goes, oh, well, it's their fault. They created the main cause for that experience of suffering. That is not how it's not how you apply this tool. So, because if you thought like that, what actually that would lead to is you not caring, just disregarding the suffering of others. So that's what we call in Buddhism is turning a god into a demon. A practice that's meant to create benefit for you yourself and for others, you're actually turning it into a cause of suffering for yourself and others. It's not how you apply it. So you apply it to yourself in your own practice, thinking about what is the main cause for this experience of suffering. It's clearly not what's going on outside. That's just a condition. It's what's happened inside, what I've done to create the main cause myself. So it turns the focus back on yourself, and that helps to stop so much of the chatter of anger and all the fuel leading up to anger, because instead you're looking, rather than at the object outside, you're looking at what's going on inside. So this is what we call the patience with regard to setting up a target. So sorry, Jerry, I know you've got your hand up there. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about this and I'll get back to you. Just 1 second. Okay. So the patience with regard to setting up a target. So here, what it's saying is that if you don't put up a target, right, this is how it works. If you're shooting a target in a target field, arrows and targets and whatnot, this is very old school, isn't it? These days we have guns. So guns, yeah, I hear that there's quite a lot of guns over in America. We hear this a lot in Australia. So people at a shooting range, for instance, if you might have a gun, but if you don't have a target that you're shooting at, then there's no target that's hit. You might shoot, but you don't hit a target. So in order to hit something, you actually need to have a target set up there. Let's go back to arrows and targets. It makes me feel much better than talking about guns. So when we look at this in terms of this particular practice of patience, then the arrow is the condition of what's happening outside. So perhaps somebody else has said something nasty to us, has done something nasty to us. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big, but that is what's considered the arrow. So the harm that's done from the outside towards us. The target is the substantial cause, or the main cause, that we have created within our own continuum. So through our past actions, in this case, it's a result of suffering. So it's a negative result. So it's due to our past negative actions that we're now experiencing this result of suffering. It's a complex topic, karmic cause and effect is not easy. So I'm just doing like a basic introduction to it. Some of you will already understand this quite well, but if you've not heard much about it before, this is something you really need to think about and do a lot of study on to really understand the logic behind this. So if we turn the focus back on ourselves and see that actually we created the main cause for this experience of suffering, the person outside was just a condition, it's almost like our own substantial cause in our own continuum kind of made them act in this way. It's kind of weird. Anyway, we don't need to go into that too much, but basically the majority, or the main thing that made us experience suffering right now, is from what we ourselves did. Externally, just a condition. So, like I said, it takes the focus off what's going on outside, puts it back on ourselves. So maybe I'll just add in a few points here. I thought I might share this file with you before the end of class so you have something to go away with. Okay, so Yep. So it draws the focus away. And then what it does, what it leads us to do, is it helps us to understand that whole process of how we go about experiencing suffering. So our focus is not about harming the person out there who is just a condition. Rather, what can I do to make it so I don't have to experience these negative results again? So instead, we change our focus to thinking, okay, well, in that case, I'll make sure I won't create further causes for suffering. So it inspires me to, let's say, so it inspires me to not want to create further causes for suffering. And also it inspires me to purify causes for suffering that I've already accumulated. So these are two things that we really need to have a good understanding of. So not wanting to create further causes for suffering would therefore make it so that we don't want to get angry, because anger is going to create a cause for future suffering. Like, for instance, when we looked at, sorry, bring up my iPad. Okay. All right. Do you remember this linear presentation that we looked at, I think, last week and also a few weeks before? All right. So if we were to, in the moment where we're experiencing some suffering, some harms being done by someone else to ourselves, if we were to respond with anger, then what happens is, when we have responded with anger, we already have a mental action or a mental karma. Not only that, it generally leads to a physical or a verbal action motivated by that anger. So that's a physical or verbal karma. And all three of those place seeds in the mental continuum, or those potencies, which give rise to a result of suffering. So it helps us to remember in the moment. So not only does reflecting on the whole process of the way in which we experience suffering through creating negative actions in the past, that leaves a seed within our mind that then manifests as suffering when we encounter a condition for it. So not only does it help to take the focus off the object of the anger and back to our own continuum, but also it reminds us that if our response in this situation were for us to get angry, and then not only get angry but act on that anger, instead of reducing our suffering, what we're doing in actual fact is exacerbating our suffering, because we're creating more and more causes of suffering through our anger and through our physical and verbal actions motivated by that anger. So reflecting on that whole process really helps us to create a bit of a, like a gap between the event that's been difficult and then our response of anger. So these are both really useful techniques, the loving kindness and compassion. Excellent antidote to stop that build up towards the anger, so all that fuel, and it also stops the anger from arising in our mind. And also thinking about it in this way, who created the substantial cause for suffering? Because we 100% think that it's the person out there that created all of our suffering. This is the way that anger makes us think. And it keeps our focus out there. But actually, when you reflect on it logically, in this process of karmic cause and effect, we have to say that we need to take some responsibility for our current experiences. That's not to say that therefore the person, the way that they're behaving is okay. You know, we're not saying that at all. Not at all, right? Bad behavior is bad behavior. And it's important to recognize bad behavior to be bad behavior. It also doesn't mean that you can't do something to take yourself away from that negative situation or to help that person stop themselves from behaving negatively. These are all things that you can do. What we're talking about is how you're responding on a mental level. And so this is another technique that really helps us to see that it's not 100% all the other person's issue. We also have some responsibility. We've had a role to play in creating the suffering that we currently experience. So that helps to reduce the anger, it helps to reduce that self-talk that's going, it's 100% the other person's problem. Okay, sorry, Jerry, what was your question?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my mouse to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I suppose going back to what I was saying earlier and some of the things you said since. So if you say irritation, being annoyed, because that's really what I'm doing. I'm not getting full-blown angry. I'm not wanting to harm anyone, but it's that habit of getting irritated quickly is, I suppose, what I was talking about. And I'm not, sometimes just here by myself, and I might just get annoyed at some gadget, you know, that's not working or whatever. Or it could be at my partner, but I'm not intending to harm him, but I might sound cranky, you know, when I just respond quickly. And maybe that's been answered in what you've said since, that okay, I have no intention to harm anyone, but that habit itself is creating negative karma. Is that right?
Well, again, I can't say 100% that you don't have the intention to harm in your mind, because we have a lot of levels of subtlety. So it can be that we change the way that we speak, like we might speak quite harshly to somebody or even just a bit abruptly towards somebody, because there is this underlying subtle intention for that to affect the other person in a way that makes them change their behavior. And so it's possible that there is a subtle intention to harm that's there together with that, even though you don't have the intention. Like if somebody asked you, do you really want them to experience suffering? You would say, no, of course I don't. This is a person that I love, right? But still, we have these very subtle intentions to harm that are quite difficult to identify. So it's good to really check our mind, because this is why we change the way that we speak. It's why we change our facial expression, for instance, is usually because we're dissatisfied with something. There's something that we don't like that's going on. We're averse to it. We want it to stop, or we want that behavior to change that we're experiencing. And so if I do something that makes the other person a little bit feel like that's not so pleasant, then they maybe will change what they're doing. So it's not like an intention for them to have a great deal of suffering, but in that moment, you might have that intention to make it so that their experience is not so pleasant, so that it benefits you in some way. It's very rare that we have that experience where we say something harsh to a person or we change our facial expression because we hope that it's going to benefit them, right? It's almost, I'd say 100%, we're doing it to benefit ourselves. And that's probably a fair indication that there is I'm not saying 100%, but you have to check your own mind. But it's probably a fair indication that there's some subtle intention to harm that's arisen in the mind. Yeah. And so, yeah, as soon as we have that intention to harm, then we've already we've accumulated negative karma, regardless of whether you act on it or not. Yeah. And in fact, ill will, as those of you who know, have studied the ethics of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, ill will is one of the 10 non-virtues. So it's one of the big ones we need to abandon wherever we can.
Okay, thank you.
So the best way to make sure that, anger doesn't arise is to really work hard at developing loving kindness and compassion, together with understanding that process of karmic cause and effect, because that helps us to understand what's happening for ourselves and also helps us to understand what's happening for the person who's harming us and what will happen for the person who's harming us. Because the person who's harming us is also, like when we develop ill will or intention to harm within our own mind, when the other person who's seeking to harm us has intention to harm in their mind, they've already created a cause for their own future suffering. Already it's done. Regardless of whether they actually manage to harm us or not, doesn't matter. They've already created a cause for their own suffering, as well as disturbed their mental peace in the moment as well, of course. Yeah. So, okay, how are we going? Are these tools, can you start to see how they're applicable and how, how they fit in your own mind? Yeah. Okay. All right then. So let's just go back to these 4 types of patients briefly. Okay, I'm just going to fill in this bit so I can send it out to you. So, you say the target is created by our own negative actions in the past. We created a target that the harm or arrow in this life was able to hit. So there's a story of when the Buddha attained enlightenment, there were these like Maharads or demons who tried to shoot arrows at him and all of this, and then it's this in the story, it's like it says the arrows all turn to flowers. So whether you take that literally or whether you take it as a metaphorical type thing of through the power of the Buddha's mind, then any harm that was intended to be done to him could not actually harm him due to the power of his own mind. So this is what we really want to try and achieve for ourselves, is so that due to the power of our own attitude, that actually, regardless of what circumstances we come across, they are unable to harm us, whether it's because we've removed all the substantial causes from within our own continuum, or whether we've been able to create positive conditions within our own mind, so that, like through loving kindness and compassion, so that even though we might have substantial causes for suffering within our own continuum, any arrows that are shot at those targets are rebuffed by the armor of loving kindness and compassion. So loving kindness and compassion do act as a kind of armor to these arrows of harm. Okay. So I'm a bit hesitant to go through the last 2 types of patients because it's a lot of information, isn't it? And then I feel like I don't want you to lose the things that we've already talked about. But I'll just run through them really briefly. And these are things that you can think about yourself. So when it talks about the patients in the manner of the guru disciple, this is especially for people who've had the experience in the Buddhist system of, for instance, somebody who you accept as your Lama, as your main teacher, somebody who's been kind enough to give you vows, for instance. So you've got a variety of vows. There are the vows of ordination. Then there are also the vows of approaching virtue, often called the layperson's vows. And these vows are all designed to make it so that our behavior is improved. So through making our behavior, by following and guarding these vows, our behavior becomes more positive, more virtuous. And on that basis, we create more causes for our own happiness. And we also start treading the path towards liberation from suffering entirely. So generally within Buddhism, somebody who gives you vows or somebody who gives you these really important instructions, we hold as somebody who's really worthy of our respect, of our veneration. It's like we'll bow down to these people because we just see them as being so incredibly kind to us. Because without them, we would be unable to possess these vows that actually act as a cause for our own happiness. So what this type of patience is saying is that, well, actually, just like somebody who gives you these vows, the approaching virtue, the layperson's vows, the vows of ordination, maybe bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, you hold as being someone who's very precious, because without this person, you'd not be able to take these vows. Likewise, the person who harms you is the only person that you can practice patience in relation to. So however kind your guru is, however kind your main teacher is, they're not somebody that you can practice patience in relation to, because they're not somebody who does you harm. But the practice of patience is so precious to us. Like, it's really, it's like as Shantideva says, it's like the greatest austerity or forbearance. It's like something that brings you so much power of mind, so much benefit, but you can only actually practice it to those that give you harm. So we should likewise, just as we have great respect and veneration to those who give us things like vows, we should have the same kind of respect and veneration and wish to repay the kindness of those who give us the opportunity to practice patience. It's a real mind shift. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's just like a brief introduction to this type of patience, and you can think over it in your own time. And then the patience with respect to ultimate reality. So this is also quite a difficult, it's quite a difficult thing to approach. This is, if you've not heard of emptiness before, then this is going to be like, what on earth is she talking about? I don't understand, right? But if you've heard a bit of emptiness before, then you'll be like, oh yeah, I kind of understand. So in this case, when somebody does us harm, and you think about, like if you think about somebody who in recent times has caused you some problems, so you bring that person to mind, and it seems as though there is like an independent person, like this really solid, concrete, almost like you could reach into their body or mind or something. You could reach in and grab hold with your hand, some kind of like solid entity that is the person themselves. That's how it appears to you. Probably even just when you're looking at me, talking to you, right? You don't have any, hopefully, no particular feelings of intention to harm, ill will, whatnot. Maybe you've just got a bit of a neutral mind there, whatever you have. But you looking at me, and probably the way that I appear to you is that there is some Tsewang that is really locatable somewhere in my body and mind that you could identify. It would be this solid, concrete thing that is like findable somehow. That's almost like it's this permanent, what's the word? Like, yeah, it's like almost like a stone. You could reach in and go, that's on. And so we direct all of our actions, whether they're like, bad actions, so ill will, whether it's goodwill or whatever it is, we direct them, on the basis of thinking that there is this hard, concrete, independent person that we're directing them to. And also, when somebody harms us or does something good to us, for instance, there is this independent, solid, concrete, findable them that is doing it to me. Actually, none of us exist like that. So the way that we exist is really independence upon all of our causes and conditions, all of our parts, so past and future parts of me, and especially independence upon our basis of designation, so our body and mind. So we just exist in this dependent way. There is no solid, concrete, findable, permanent me that exists within our body and mind. We exist independence. We're imputed, in fact, onto our body and mind. So it's a complex topic. We still exist. It's not that we don't exist at all. I remember one time after we'd had some teachings at Chenrezig Institute. So where Chenrezig Institute is on a kind of a hill. And the Gompa and the nuns community and the retreat huts are all sort of on the top of the hill. And then you have to walk down all these stairs to get to the car park. And so you get to the bottom of the stairs and there's a road that runs right around the bottom of the stairs there. So sometimes people will drive halfway up the hill, come down, and then drive around the bottom of the stairs and out. So we'd had these teachings on emptiness one time. So on, like, for example, the person not existing as a solid, concrete, independent me, but actually being merely labeled independence upon body and mind, existing as a dependent arising. And so I was driving down, I'd been halfway up the hill and I was driving down and I got to the bottom of the stairs and I was driving carefully, fortunately, because one of the other ladies who'd been in the class, she came down very fast down the stairs, jumped out in front of my car and went, "Oh, it's all empty anyway." So that's not the understanding to take from this. Because regardless of whether you're empty or not, you will still die if you jump in front of a car that's moving fast, right? So a person still exists, but we exist in this particular way of being dependent upon our body and mind. So again, like I said, this is something to just think about. We don't have time to go into it in great detail, but it is a really important topic. So I'll share the file with you and then you can have a think about it. And also in other classes that you might go to, then you can ask questions about this, right? And that'll help to understand and improve your understanding. Okay, so, all right. We've got a few minutes left and I've just given you a whole lot of extra information, but please don't worry if you don't understand those last few points. The most important ones for us to focus on are loving kindness and compassion based on understanding how we ourselves actually do not have control of our own minds. So just as soon as we encounter an object, we're so quick to get angry, we're so quick to get attached. And in actual fact, it's quite interesting. I was teaching another class on the 4 close placements of mindfulness. And we're doing a bit of meditation on close placement of mindfulness on feelings. And it was really fascinating to do this meditation where we were just watching our mind. So there's different meditations that you do in this particular practice, but one of them was watching the mind to see what feelings arise in the mind. So happy feelings, feelings that are like of discomfort, and then to notice what the mind does on the basis of that. And what you start to notice is that pretty much with every instance, if you have a happy feeling, there is this really strong desire to hold on to that comes up, this pulling onto it. If you have an unpleasant feeling, there's this immediate desire to push away from it. And that happens like automatically. And on the basis of that, then, when you hold on tight to these pleasant feelings, that increases your attachment. And when you push away from the unpleasant feelings, that increases your anger. What we need to do is make it so that, our mind becomes balanced towards whether we experience feelings of suffering, whether we experience feelings of happiness, and to really understand that our mind is totally controlled by this constant desire to be free from suffering and have more happiness. And on that basis, anger and attachment constantly arise. That's how it is for ourselves, and that's how it is for everybody else. So wanting for both ourselves and for all others to be free of this lack of control. So important. Yeah. Okay, I've talked a lot. Do you have any questions? I've talked too much, and so you don't have any questions.
Venerable, I think there's a question on chat. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, what was that? There's a question on the chat. Okay, let me have a look. How about impatience? Impatience essentially, we would say, is anger. Impatience, so technically in Tibetan, the word for impatience would be mazepa, which is like just basically like we say for patience is zepa, and in Tibetan it's mizepa. So we could say that impatience, yeah, I mean, I have a question about this myself. If it is impatience, is it necessarily anger? as a question because miserpa, the word in Tibetan, it gives the connotation of being unable to bear. So we would also perhaps use this term miserpa or impatience or intolerance, sometimes in the context of compassion. So finding the suffering of others, being unable to bear the suffering of others, we wouldn't say that that's an impatience, but it is this inability to bear. So yeah, I guess my question is like, is patience necessarily anger? Probably for us, it mostly is. But just bear in mind, there is also this inability to bear the suffering of others that actually spurs you on to want to do something good for others. So it actually spurs you on to act in a compassionate way. Shella, did you have a question? No. Okay.
I had a quick question, Venerable.
Yes?
Try to turn on my camera and hopefully the whole thing doesn't shut down.
Yeah, I understand.
There we go.
Hello.
Hello. As I try to practice patience, I think I'm observing that I'm becoming a little passive, and that doesn't sit well with me. So how can I practice patience and not feel like people are taking advantage of me because I'm being passive?
Yeah. Well, practicing patience doesn't mean you just have to be a doormat. Definitely not. So the important thing is that when we're practicing patience, if we have a really good practice of loving kindness and compassion so that you're maintaining in your mind that goodwill towards others, the intention to benefit others, then actually you can act in a way that maybe is like, for instance, you might act in an assertive way, for instance, but not for your own sake yourself, but actually for the benefit of the other person who's harming you. Seeing that what they're doing in harming you is actually harming themselves, then if you really have that intention to benefit them, then you can explain to them, actually, your behavior is harmful to you and it's harmful to me. This is not benefiting the situation. I think you need to stop that behavior. But you're not doing it out of just a self-cherishing focus. You're actually doing it for an outward-looking focus from the space of a good heart. Yeah. But in terms of, we don't want to make it so that we're, I suppose, lying to ourselves in thinking that we have compassion when in actual fact our main motivation is for ourselves. Yeah. But definitely you can act on the basis of having loving kindness and compassion. You don't have to be a doormat. Yeah. Sometimes I would say there is a benefit to, it depends on the situation, but sometimes there's a benefit to our own mind in terms of, there's, I think it's in Geshe Chengawa's 8 verses for training the mind, where he says, what's the verse how it says, accepting defeat and offering the victory to others. So some of you may have heard of this particular line. So in that case, sometimes there is a benefit in terms of our own mental development to actually leave it as it is. It's not that you're being a doormat, because you're not just like thinking that behavior that's coming your way is okay, but rather you're using it as your own mental practice to see how you can reduce your worldly concerns, using that particular situation to reduce your worldly concerns in your own mind. So there are cases in which you may not react for your own benefit in your practice, but it's a personal thing.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to do, but for the most part, I'm just lying to myself, because there's still that level of, yes, for my practice, yeah, it's okay, I could make an offering, you don't have to pay me back or stuff like that. But in my mind, like small, minute when I observe it, but there's that still level of, but it's mine, it's my money, it's my thing, you should pay me back. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. So even though I'm practicing and I'm meditating, I'm like, yeah, I'm letting go and it's okay, I'm practicing and I can wait. And if you ever come around to it, there's still that little thing that pops up that, yeah, but it's unfair.
Yeah. And it won't go away straight away. It will take a long time for that to disappear. I think, it takes a lot of practice. So really need to try and hit that, because that's coming from the self-cherishing, right? So that self-cherishing will come up again and again and again, you know, because we're so familiar with it. This is what happens to us. But if we can imagine what our lives, our minds would be like if we have completely evicted that from our mind, actually you have a lot of freedom within how you behave towards others. If you have completely evicted that self-cherishing from your mind and you're only focused on the benefit of others, your mind is very peaceful. It's really being pacified. It's quite serene. It's not concerned about what's happening for yourself. But you can definitely and, you know, easily act to do what you need to do to help others to improve their own minds, to improve their own actions. Yeah. So actually, the benefit is for you if you're able to reduce that self-cherishing.
Working on it. Thank you.
We're all working on it. But I'd say, like, definitely, if we continue to act on the basis of our anger, you know, thinking or telling ourselves that we're actually acting on the basis for, you know, on the basis of goodwill for other people, but we actually continue to allow anger, ill will to reside in our minds, then we're not going to improve. We have to keep working to reduce that and not act on the basis of our ill will.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. Good question. And I think it's probably the experience of everybody who tries to practice patience. Yeah. Okay, well, any other final questions before we finish off? Okay, well, it's been lovely to talk to you all. I hope it, oh, I was going to share the, sorry, before we finish, I will share that file in the chat so that you have it there. Just 1 second, bear with me. Okay, it's just sending through there. All right. Oh, my Juniper says, when's my next event? So I think I'm teaching the Discovering Buddhism on bodhicitta that starts in early January, I think, is the next time we're teaching for the centre here online. So if you come along to that, I will see you there. But it's been lovely to chat with you all, really. So lovely to meet you all. Really appreciate it. And all your questions and comments and discussions. It's been fantastic. So I hope that some of the things that I've said have been helpful. And if you haven't understood all of it, don't worry, because it's a process. We have to keep working at it again and again, studying more and more. And then gradually over time, it's kind of like the layers of an onion, you know, you pull off the outside layers and you find, oh, there's a bit more going on under there. You pull off more layers and eventually we'll get all those layers off and things will, you know, our minds will improve and develop limitlessly. So it's an ongoing process. Don't expect that it's going to happen overnight. It's however much effort, consistent effort that we put into these things, then that will determine the benefit that we get from them. So please keep working at it, especially loving kindness and compassion. So important. You can't go wrong with loving kindness and compassion, really. They'll benefit you in the immediate sense, and they'll also benefit you long term in terms of the causes for happiness that you create for yourself. All right. So we'll leave it there for today. And we'll finish off with the final dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Okay, well, I look forward to seeing you again sometime in the future, and all the best with your practice of patience.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so